Good morning, everybody. We will get started. Welcome. It's so nice to see so many of you here today. I'm here to welcome you to the annual Elul lecture. My name is Zoe Lang, for those of you who don't know me. Today, I am being director of Mayan. In other circumstances, I also teach at Maimonides School, so some of you may know me from that. I'm also just going to move this bottle. It's a season of preparation and reflection, and preparation and reflection are not two things that always go well together. So I know that all of us are very busy people, and it's so wonderful to see so many of you here today. Thank you for taking the time to come out and learn. The Elul lecture was established by Mayan as a tribute to Rosalie Katchen, whose yahrzeit was on the 11th of Elul. In her position as Hebraica librarian at Brandeis University, she assisted students and faculty in their study and research. Rosalie served on the Mayan board, and she was an avid participant in our classes. It seems fitting that an event originally established in memory of Rosalie is beginning our year for our 30th anniversary, as we pay tribute to the many women who were an integral part of creating Mayan and sustaining it for the past 3 decades. And I also want to take a moment, we have several board members here and several people who have served as board members in the past. So thank you so much for your work and contributions. This event truly today would not have been possible without all of your help. This Elul marks a particularly special occasion, the end of a Shemitah year, which was followed by the mitzvah of Hakel during Sukkot. For this mitzvah, men, women, children, and the stranger, or gerim, would come together for a reading of the Torah. In the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides notes that this event is one of the few positive time-bound mitzvot in which women are obligated. In fact, Hakel obligated several groups of people who are generally exempt, including women, children, and foreigners living within an Israeli society. If you want to see more about other people obligated who aren't usually, you should look in Chakika. Maimonides further notes an additional group obligated in Hakel who one might think might not be required to attend. To quote the Rambam, even great scholars who knew the entire Torah were required to listen with the utmost attention. Each had to regard himself, or I will add herself, as if obligated by the Torah now for the first time. For the Rambam, the purpose of Hakel was twofold. On the individual level, it was an opportunity to reestablish and reaffirm faith by hearing these familiar texts like they were new. Even for those who might think that these texts have nothing more to say to them, Hakel reminded them to listen with new ears. For the community, it brought together men and women, adults and children, citizens and foreigners, Torah scholars and novices. The whole community was united. As the Shemitah year draws to a close, what a privilege to have an opportunity to host this event that reminds us of this individual and collective mitzvah and revisit our texts from our traditions as though for the first time. We are honored and privileged today that we will be having the opportunity to learn with Dr. Rivka Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz serves as Associate Principal, General Studies at SAR High School in the Bronx, and as a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. She earned a PhD in the history of science from Princeton University and has spent 2 decades in the fields of Jewish secondary and post-secondary education. Dr. Schwartz lectures and writes widely about issues of contemporary importance in the American Jewish community. Her writings, lectures, and her inimitable Twitter feed have offered invaluable perspectives on living an authentic Orthodox life in the midst of our challenging modern world, and I look forward to hearing her speak today. Before we hear from Dr. Schwartz, I would like to invite the board president of Mayan, Novich, to speak. Today's Elul lecture is sponsored by the Cohen-Novich family in honor of Rabbi Reuven Cohen's 5th yahrzeit.
On behalf of my family and on behalf of the Mayan board, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Elul lecture and thank you for joining us. As we approach Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, my father's 5th yahrzeit still draws my focus during this time of introspection. This year, I find myself focused on the living legacy of my father, the actions that my brother and I take to carry his mantle forward. As a Kohen, a rabbi, and a teacher, my brother Naftali carries on many of the rituals and the teaching. And for me, here in Boston, I also find myself reinforcing the footsteps of my father and of my mother here at Share, at my Maimonides school, and most notably, serving as the president of Ma'ayan's board. Ma'ayan is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. And after almost 3 years of COVID, we are so excited to reinvigorate our community with in-person text-focused learning in the Boston area. Ma'ayan was founded in 1992 with the idea that the interaction between students, faculty, and the text generates exciting, sophisticated conversations to delight our students, sharpen their skills, and deepen their Torah knowledge. In talking with Deb Cram, Ma'ayan's founding director, and with Sybil Levison and my mother, Rochelle Cohn, both founding board members, I recently revisited another element of the Ma'ayan origin story. The year was 1972. My father was recently married, studying in the doctoral program at Harvard, and teaching at our beloved Maimonides school. The Bostoner Rebbe started a yeshiva for young men to strengthen the Jewish community here in Boston during the Vietnam War. But he also, somewhat surprisingly, asked my father to teach in a learning program for women. Deb Cram, Helen Wegline, and my mother, Rochelle, as well as some of the other founding board members, were part of these classes. For my father, I believe this was the first time he was teaching a class for women only. And he offered those students a new way to approach learning, text first rather than teacher first. It was about the discussion, not about the discourse. 20 years later, when Deb Cram, Rabbi Seth Farber, and the founding board contemplated what Ma'ayan's program would look like, my father's class was top of mind for many, and he was recruited as one of the first teachers. In all of the classes he taught, my father ensured that every student could access the text. In his later years, he would painstakingly format his source sheets to align translations in a student-centered manner through typeface and formatting. The source sheet was the scaffolding, layering texts through the generations, from Torah to Talmud, from Meforshim to modern scholars, from ancient piyut to poetry, setting up the students to discover both his insights and their own. The source sheet was the catalyst for the conversation. As he would walk with his students through the texts, he would invite them to interpret on their own. He would attribute those ideas to the individuals in the class, encouraging them and elevating them. And always, his sense of humor energized his students. Adult education became something that was part of my father's life. Every year, he taught multiple classes from Ma'ayan, here at Share, at CJP's Maya program, and to various groups around Boston. One of the photographs we have of my father teaching is a personal favorite. He's kind of mid-sentence, engaging with his students, and it illustrates what is so special about learning in person. It is uplifting, and it is why Ma'ayan is such a special organization. Ma'ayan is dedicated to creating rich, dynamic encounters between adults and the texts of Jewish tradition. And these encounters include building up the next generation of teachers with our new Emerging Scholar Fellowship, or ESF program. Hopefully everyone has one of those little flyers about the program. It's very exciting. So I can say resolutely, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person and online this coming year. As Zoe already shared with us, Ma'ayan's founding board also included Rosalie Katchen, who is very special to my family and to our community, and who is in our thoughts today as her 22nd yahrzeit recently passed. We thank the community for having initiated this rich tradition of a lecture in Elul in Rosalie's memory over 20 years ago. May we keep Rosalie, Shoshana Rezel, Bat Avraham Yehoshua Uvela Toiva, and my father, Harav Ruben Tzvi ben Harav Moshe Yeshaya HaKohen Udvora Braina, in our hearts as we learn Torah in their memory. And now on to our guest speaker. We are so honored to learn with Dr. Rivka Schwartz today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zoe, for all of your work on the logistics and the organization. Thank you to the Cohen family for your sponsorship, and thank you to Mayan for inviting me to be here. I want to start by saying that this is a age-targeted talk. I'm very happy to have younger members of the community here with us and delighted to have you listen to me. It's not that there's anything here that's inappropriate for younger people to hear, but this is really addressing a particular age and stage in life. I hope even those of you who may not be in quite the same age and stage of life will find something in what I'm saying that is meaningful to you. In the Rosh Hashanah davening, in the Shemona Esrei Musaf, the Amidav Musaf, as part of the section of Zichron note, talking about how God remembers on Rosh Hashanah, we quote a very, very famous pasuk, song, in which God says to the Jewish people, Zacharti lach chesed ne'urayich ahavak klulotayich lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz lo zerua. I remember for you the kindness of your youth, the love of your bridal days, how you followed me into the wilderness in a land that was not cultivated. That's the characteristic of young love. Do crazy things, go following God off into the desert. Nothing is there. No idea what you'll find. No idea what you'll go, where you'll go. Because that is the characteristic besottedness, infatuation of the early stages of a relationship. My children make fun of me. I've in recent years become a fairly serious hiker. Before that, I was a Jew from Brooklyn who didn't go outside if I didn't have to. In recent years, I've become a fairly serious hiker. And last February, I went hiking in Big Bend National Park in Texas. Big Bend is the least visited national park in the United States, and I can tell you why. You fly into the airport, the bustling metropolis of Midland, Texas, rent your car, and then you drive 4 hours south through the desert. And there is nothing on either side of you as far as the eye can see. And they warn you, write down directions, because at some point cell phone reception will stop. And you're not going to be able to figure out where you're going unless you have directions. And you just head off into the desert, into a land that is not sown, that is not planted. And you have a sense of what it is that Hashem is saying to Klal Yisrael that you did, that you were willing to do. My friend and noted from Twitter personality, David Bashevkin, who's director of education for NCSY, every year before Shavuot, he reposts that a Rosh Yeshiva in Ner Yisrael, where he learned, talks about why we stay up all night on Shavuot night. It really makes no sense. Throws you off the whole next day, throws you off for the next 3 days. You know, you don't really accomplish any more meaningful learning. So why do we do it? And he says that, as Rosh Yeshiva said, the reason we did it is when you're young and in love, you do crazy things. So if the beginning of our relationship with Hashem and with the Torah, the giving of the Torah is on Shavuot, so when you're young and in love, you do crazy things. But then, as with every relationship, routine sets in. Maybe even disenchantment sets in, but certainly routine sets in. The partner that you were besotted with leaves their socks on the floor or hair in the sink. The excitement of falling in love becomes the drudgery of carpool and bills and dentist visits. The newborn that you swore you would appreciate the wonder of every day and never say a harsh word to becomes the sullen preteen or the inscrutable teenager. And well, yeah. That is the nature of the difference between those early moments, stages of excited new love in any relationship and the long-termness of it. And this is a talk about what happens when we go from that stage of new love, whether that was you spent some time in a yeshiva or an institution of higher Torah learning as a young adult, whether that was you're up in a non-observant home and at some point you got exposed to observant Judaism and chose observant Judaism, whether it was you grew up in a different faith or a different community, at some point learned about and chose Judaism. There was that moment or those moments of infatuation, of overwhelming excitement, of I'll do crazy things and I'll stay up all night. And then we turn around and it's 20 years later and we're in the adolescence of our relationship. And what does it look like? How do we manage to maintain a relationship both with Hashem and with our Jewish practice beyond the moments of that initial takenness, that initial besottedness, that initial overcomeness? What does it look like to cultivate an adult relationship with God and Judaism? And so the first source I want us to look at, after all that love we talked about Mahayana and Jewish sources, the first source I want us to look at is a Robert Frost poem, but here I am up in the land of Robert Frost, so I figure you'll forgive me for that. Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaves a flower, but so only an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. That first leaf you see sometime in March that tells you that the long, cold winter is going to be over and spring is coming. That first leaf is a flower. That first leaf is something of incredible beauty. But then leaf subsides to leaf, and it just goes back to being leaf. The glory of the breaking of dawn. I happen to wake up really early in the morning. It's another function of middle age. I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. My apartment faces east over the East River. I see the sun coming up every morning. My youngest child doesn't wake up quite as early as I do, but he wakes up early. And when it's a particularly beautiful sunrise, I'll call him. He'll say, "Dov, come see, come see." Like, I saw 200 sunsets this year already. No, come see this one also. It's a really beautiful sunrise. Not sunset, sunrise, right? But then the break of dawn just becomes day. And it's just day, and it's day. And it's ordinary. Nothing gold can stay. So it's not a question of how do we hold on to that. You can't really. Your leaf is going to become a leaf. Your dawn is going to become a day. The question is how we transition that relationship or any relationship from those initial moments to something that is different and that is sustained. I don't usually do this when I speak. I don't usually give you signposts of where I'm going, but I actually wanted to give you some of the different things that by the time we hit middle age or beyond can have us in a different place in our relationship, either with God or the Jewish people. I gave you 5 things here. We'll see if we make our way through all of them this morning. But what gets us to a different place in our relationship with Hashem, in our relationship with Judaism, in our relationship with maybe both Jewish practice and the Jewish people, and then to think about what. It's not enough to, analyze the problem. That doesn't really leave you a lot to work with. Here's the problem. Here are 5 steps to the problem. Have a nice day. I'm getting on the train back to New York. Doesn't really help you a lot. So we're going to see if there's anything we can say that's constructive and practical about how we engage with those realities in a way that possibly gives us some direction as to how to end up someplace a little different. The first one is routine, ennui. At some point, it was exciting to be doing whatever I was doing. And now I've been doing the same thing day in and day out, and year in and year out, and decade in and decade out. And at some point, it's hard to keep feeling excited about doing the same thing. So I want to show you a really great source. It's a really great source because it's a really great source. It's also a really great source because as an historian, it's quite fascinating that we don't know where this source is supposed to come from. This source shows up in the introduction to the Ein Yaakov. The Ein Yaakov is a compilation of the Agadic parts of the Talmud, of the Gemara. The Gemara contains Agadic parts, kind of stories, elaborations on verses, all kinds of things. And it also contains halachic parts. And the Ein Yaakov is a compilation just of the Agadic parts of the Gemara. And the introduction to the Ein Yaakov, he quotes this source, and it's actually not clear where he gets it from. There's another very, very famous midrash like this that actually doesn't exist as a midrash. It first shows up as a very famous, actually a few other famous midrashim like that. And as an historian, I find it super interesting when you have something that's a really widely known, cited, circulated source, but when you try to track it down, where exactly did this come from? But here's the source. Parts of this we have in other sources, but the punchline only shows up here in the introduction to the Ein Yaakov. And that is, different scholars are talking about, different sages are talking about, what is the pasuk we find? What is the verse that we find that's like an overarching verse that includes all of the Torah in it, okay? So Ben Zoma says, What's the inclusive verse that includes everything? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's a great candidate. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Ben Anna says we found an even more overarching inclusive verse. V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Again, a very famous candidate for being seen as an overarching pasuk, an overarching verse that includes everything there is to include in the Torah. Along comes Shimon ben Pazi and says, Matzinu pasuk kolel yoter. We have found a verse that includes even more, and it is Et hakeves ha'echad ta'aseh b'boker ve'et hakeves ha'sheni ta'aseh bein ha'arbayim. The first lamb you shall sacrifice in the morning, and the second lamb you shall sacrifice in the evening. This is talking about the Karban Tamid, the daily offering every single day. You bring in the morning and in the afternoon, sacrifice every single day. Rabbi Ploni stood up and said, the halacha is in accordance with Ben Pasi. That is the verse, that is the pasuk that contains the most that there is to contain about Jewish life and practice and observance. The first lamb you shall sacrifice in the morning, and the second lamb you shall sacrifice in the evening. This has become actually a really popular source that contemporary expounders, rabbis, teachers, preachers like to talk about, because it's talking about exactly this. Why is that the biggest deal in the whole Torah? Because if you can keep going through that, the routine and the repetition, I'm doing the same thing this afternoon that I did this morning, that I did the day before, and the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that, and somehow I'm finding a way to continue investing in that, committing to that, finding meaning from that. Somehow that's the whole ballgame. If I can do that instead of like, oh no, not again. Talmud Bein Ha'arbayim, not again. Then I figured the whole thing out. Okay, great. So problem number one is just the repetition and the routine and the over and over again. And the greatest thing in Judaism is if you can figure out how to find continued meaning, even in the repetition and the routine and the doing the same thing over and over again. Rivka, tell me something I don't know. How do you propose I go about doing that? It's not the same way that when your child is born and you say, there's never going to be a day in my life that I don't recognize the wonder that is this human being that I've given birth to. And then it's like, did you do your homework and put your dishes in the sink? So fairly recently, in the past year, this is wearing my other hat as a fellow for the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. I learned from a colleague of mine, Dr. Alana Stein-Hain, about a body of academic study and thought about ritual. It's been super fascinating. I've been reading lots of it, really a weird little rabbit hole to go down, really interesting. These are scholars, academics, not halachists, not practitioners of observant Judaism, studying what ritual is and how ritual functions and the significance of ritual. And I'm about to share with you something from somebody named Adam Seligman.
He's a member of our shul.
Are you serious? You are not serious. OMG. I'm about to share with you something from somebody named Adam Seligman, who's a member of your shul. So you will know him better than I do. That's fabulous. Awesome. About ritual, which ever since I work in high school. Okay, I work in a high school, and one of the things I do working in high school is I have to daven every morning with teenagers. I run a minyan every morning with 10th to 12th graders. I love 10th to 12th graders. I've chosen to spend my entire life with 10th to 12th graders. Let me tell you that davening with 10th to 12th graders every morning is a heavy lift. A heavy lift for them, and it's a heavy lift for me, okay? Because they don't super connect to the words of tefillah. Well, guess what? Neither do most of us. But many of us have the sense that I'm just supposed to daven every day. I'm supposed to show up and daven every day. When I sat in row 16D, seat 16D on my JetBlue flight this morning and davened Shachris on my way here, I'm not telling you it was a transporting spiritual experience, but I have the sense that that's what I'm supposed to do every morning, so I do it every morning. And you know what teenagers say? Teenagers say it's not real, it's not sincere, it's not authentic. For teenagers, sincerity and authenticity are really, really big things. We're adults and be like, no, whatever, we watch it. Teenagers, it's like, it's not real, it's not sincere. Why should I say it? I'm not feeling it. So what do we say to them? For years, I said to them that as part of the Jewish people and Jewish community and Jewish history, and you join with the tzibur, whether you personally are feeling it or not. And then I learned this, right? Here's a different approach to what it means to do it if you're not feeling it. And it rearranged all my mental furniture, and I've been quoting it to kids and adults ever since. Relationships that fail to construct a shared subjunctive, a subjunctive is an as if, over the long term tend to fall apart. It is not enough to love each other sincerely if people fail to act as if they love each other. And acting as if they love each other includes ritualized forms of expressing concern. Anti-ritualist attitudes, by this he means they have to be sincere. I can't do something just in a ritual fashion. I can only do it if I really feel it. Anti-ritualist attitudes deny the value to the subjunctive of play, convention, and illusion. What that means is anti-ritualists say, no, it's not worth it if it's pretend or make-believe. It's only worth it if I feel it sincerely in that moment. They seek to root interaction in some attestation to the sincerity of their interlocutors, okay? But that doesn't actually work in a relationship. It doesn't work in a relationship if you only say I love you in the moments when you are feeling profoundly transported by love. That's one kind of I love you in a relationship. And the other kind of I love you in a relationship is the ritual I love you before you hang up the phone that you don't think about and that almost doesn't mean anything. This is not in this selection from what he wrote, but in something else he wrote, he actually specifically talks about that I love you before you hang up the phone. You may not be thinking deeply about it. You may not be meaning it in an intensely and sincerely felt way, but that I love you is an as if. In this moment, when I'm just giving you the shopping list and then getting off the phone, I'm summoning as if we were in that place or felt that way. That sometimes we are, but honestly, we aren't right now. Right now, I'm just telling you a dozen eggs before you come home. But the ritual, the as if, summons up that as is, even when it isn't right in this moment. And all the way at the end, he says, this is why one can repeat it for years and years to the same person. In so doing, one is not adding any bit of hitherto unknown information, but instead acting out a ritual rather in the manner of a prayer. I said to my high school students, I said to myself first, then I said to my high school students, what if instead of thinking that the job of tefillah is to have a transporting spiritual experience, and 999 times out of 1,000, I fail, you fail, we all fail at tefillah. And we just have a kind of mumbled off Shemona Esrei, and it's not a transporting spiritual experience. What if I think of that not as a failed Shemona Esrei, but as a different kind of declaration of love? There are those moments of intense feeling when you say I love you out of a place of intense feeling, and those are those tefillot that have that intense feeling behind them. And then there are all of the ritual times when you say I love you before you hang up the phone. And it's not deeply felt and it's not deeply meant. It's a ritual. And what if your Shemona Esrei today, okay, it wasn't the profoundly moved I love you say to your child before you walk them down to the chuppah. What if your Shemona Esrei today was just the I love you before I hang up the phone? It's not a failed Shemona Esrei. It's just a different thing. Thinking about ritual this way makes it not a failed act of sincerity. It actually makes it something else that serves a different purpose. And I think reframing for ourselves what our own Avodat Hashem is and looks like, so that instead of thinking about it as a service of God that's a failure most of the time and a success on very rare occasions, and it's kind of hard to get excited about that because like mostly I'm a failure and it doesn't feel good, it's hard to get excited about. What if I thought about it as two different things that I'm doing? And sometimes I'm being profoundly moved by intense feeling. And sometimes I'm enacting a ritual, but the ritual is also necessary for a relationship. If I said to my children, okay, here's how it's going to go, kids. I'm only going to say I love you to you in the moment when I'm intensely feeling an overflowing of love. And otherwise, I'm not going to say I love you to you. That wouldn't do great things for my relationship with my kids. Instead, I say I love you to you in a lot of circumstances, and sometimes I really love you, but I need you to put your dishes in the sink. And sometimes it's I love you before I hang up the phone and neither of us is thinking much about it. And sometimes it's a deeply felt and expression of where our relationship genuinely is in that moment, the as if and the as if. So I think, what is this saying? It's saying we are not going to change the reality of the habit and the repetition. It is true that by the time you've done 2 decades of bringing those morning and afternoon offerings, they aren't going to feel the same way they did the first time you brought them. And if you think that the goal is they always should, then we're failing most of the time, and most of our acts of prayer, fulfillment of mitzvot, actually become actions of failures. And if we think about them as ritual in this way, if we think about them not as failed expressions of authentic feeling, but as a declaration of the as if of the relationship, then those two, those ritualized repetitive actions, those ritualized repetitive tefillot, can become something that cements and strengthens the relationship, and can become something that we actually feel good about doing instead of feeling bad about ourselves most of the time about doing. It's hard to keep doing something if you just feel like you're failing at it all the time. It's totally fine. This really, for me, has been a significant mental furniture rearranger. I spoke in my shul at home on Tisha B'Av. Like, what if I don't feel, sad the morning, the loss of Churban Beit HaMikdash? You don't have to feel it. You have to do the things of the day that we do. And if they summon the feelings in you, they don't. They do, and if they don't, they don't. And if saying the keynote and sitting on the floor and refraining from the activities distract the morning evoke the feelings, they evoke the feelings. If they don't evoke the feelings, by engaging in the ritual, you're creating the as if I felt that way, whether I do or I don't. We can stop spending all this time taking our own emotional temperature. I am feeling the right thing. I'm not feeling the right thing. I am feeling regret and penitence. I'm not feeling regret and penitence. And we can instead immerse ourselves in the ritual experience of the days of awe, knowing that if we do that, we are creating an as if of the relationship, whether or not it is the as if. So that's the first thing. Routine, ennui. That's the first thing. 10:45. Let's talk fast. The next thing I spoke about is 2 different versions of is that all there is? I think you hit a stage in life where it becomes abundantly clear to you that one day you're going to die, and planet Earth is going to keep on turning without you, and the world is going to go on without you, and everything's going to be just fine, and the only reckoning for the worth or the value of your life is going to be what I've done in my life. And then I think we encounter 2 different kinds of is that all there is? One is the is that all there is of success, and the other one is the is that all there is of I haven't achieved the success that I have wanted to. The is that all of success is I hit the markers I wanted to hit. I got the degree, I published the papers, I achieved the position, I earned the salary, whatever the markers of success are, I've accomplished them, I've achieved them. And now I'm at a stage of my life where I'm saying like, okay. And what now? And of course, the person who experienced that and expresses that most of all is Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, who, according to tradition, is not only the wisest man who ever lives, he amasses enormous wealth, he builds the Beit HaMikdash, he establishes a powerful and prosperous kingdom. And he writes Sefer Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, which we read on Chol Moed Sukkot, towards the end of his life, and we read it in the fall, towards the end of the year, we've gathered in the harvest. And it's a time to look back and say, okay, is that all there is? And that is, in fact, what Kohelet does and says. And he goes, for a lot of Kohelet quoted here. I'll read a little.
I gave you the English, you had given the Hebrew.
I'll read a little bit of it. Right? Famously, he starts off, Havel Havalim Amar Kohelet, Havel Havalim Akol Havel. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Dor holech v'dor bav, ha'aretz olam amadet. A generation comes, a generation goes. We pass on from the world, and the world is still here. Everything just keeps on going. The rivers keep flowing to the sea, and the sea is not full. Stuff just keeps going on. What we do doesn't seem to make a difference. And then he goes on to say a little bit later on, if you, the next source, parak bet. Asiti liganotu pardesim v'natati b'hem eitz kol peri. Asiti, yeah, it goes on. I have accumulated for myself orchards and fruit trees, and I planted every kind of tree, and I built cisterns, and I could irrigate and I accumulated wealth and slaves and flocks and everything else, gold, silver, treasures, everything else. And then upaniti ani b'chol ma'asai she'asu yadai. I looked to everything that my hands had done, and all the work that I had done, the wealth that I had accomplished, and I see that it is all futile, it's all nothing, and there's no value under the sun. So is there all there is of success. Okay, I've accomplished all, I've accumulated all, I've amassed all, and what exactly is the point of all this? Where does this leave me now? And on the other side, for others of us, we hit middle age and we say, I thought I was going to be someplace else. I thought I was going to have done something else. I had dreams and ambitions, and instead I'm in that whirl of carpool and drop off, and which bill am I paying, which bill am I waiting to pay till some more money comes in, and how am I struggling to manage all the demands and pulls of my life. And it just seems like I'm juggling all day long, being pulled on all ends, in terms of my time, in terms of my resources, in terms of my energy. And this isn't what I thought my life was going to be. And this isn't what I thought it was going to look like. And for that, I give you source number 5, actually from Paro with the Jews in Egypt, where when the Jews start listening to Moshe and start getting ideas in their heads about redemption and about leaving to serve God, Paro's response is, don't provide them with straw for making bricks, but maintain the quota of the number of bricks they have to make. In other words, increase the workload on the people. Final pasuk I gave you, tichbara avodah al hanashim. Increase the work on the people, and then they won't have any time for their brains to go flying off to these nonsense ideas about redemption and leaving and serving God and all these other silly things that Moshe is telling them. So either way, whether it's I've accomplished everything and is this it, or I feel so pulled and tugged, or both. Right, that could be both too. I've accomplished a lot of things, and I'm not sure if that's it. And at the same time, I feel so pulled and tugged. And none of this leaves me sort of space for, I don't know how to think about my relationship with God and Judaism in this. And again, sometimes it's because I thought I was going to be a great Torah scholar and a great Torah teacher, and I've accomplished so much, and I haven't. And sometimes because the pulls and the tugs of my life, I was sure I was going to at least have steady time for learning Torah, or be davening in a minyan 3 times a day, or whatever, be davening a minyan 3 times on Shabbos, whatever it is I thought I would be doing. And instead, I find myself not doing any of those things. I think that one version or another of is this all there is another very present reality of a adult stage of life, by which I mean middle-aged and beyond stage of life. And I actually think that if I say something not nice about David Brooks, you're gonna tell me he's a member of your shul also. Rabbi, before I say something not nice about David Brooks, I think David Brooks might have sort of ish, I'm not totally sure, converted to Christianity. There's like the little situation there with his second wife, so I'm not sure, he's probably not a member of your shul. He wrote a book. And I have beef with David Brooks. It's not fair to have beef with somebody about the conduct of their personal life, but having said that, I have beef with David Brooks about the conduct of his personal life. His first wife converted to Judaism, changed her name to Sarah, which was the traditional name that women who were Jews by choice took. He was married to her for 20 some odd years. And he wrote a book about the moral life with a young research assistant. And then somehow he ended up no longer married to his wife. And then he ended up married to his research assistant. And then he got his research assistant was a devout Christian. And then he ended up very interested in Christianity and maybe sort of kind of converted. I saw one podcast with him where his interviewer described him as a recent convert to Christianity. His interviewer was a Christian minister, so I'm not sure I should exactly take his word on that. So I kind of have my issues with David Brooks. Having said that, David Brooks wrote a book called The Second Mountain, because he's really describing himself, and he's describing a reality that's real for a lot of people. He was rocketing to the top, young writer and editor and publisher of bestsellers and everything else. And then you get to a certain point in your life, you've accomplished so many things so quickly, so young. And again, that question of, is there all that there is? And he talks about the second mountain in life, climbing the second mountain. You made it to the top of the first mountain. First mountain is your professional accomplishments and your name on the, on the top of the New York Times bestseller list and whatever it is. And I would also say, although it's not quite what he's writing about, it's also true if you realize you're not getting to the top of that first mountain. The things I thought I was doing are not happening. Either way, there's a second mountain, and it's actually exactly where Kohelet ends up. Because Kohelet doesn't end up vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's not where he ends up. Kohelet ends up with nothing is worth anything except my study of Torah and my worship of God. That what ultimately is worth something is that. And I would add, which I don't think is different than my study of Torah, my worship of God, my connection to my family, my investment in the people I care most deeply about and who care most deeply about me. And it's not about one way or another, whether I've succeeded in it or I failed in it. Either way, it's not about accumulating stickers on some sticker chart of life. Whether I have accumulated the stickers and I wonder if there's more, or I haven't accumulated the stickers and I'm dismayed that I have. Either way, it's not about accumulating stickers on the sticker chart of life. Either way, it's about focusing on the things. And here I want to say that very thing, a sense of disappointment or dismay or disillusionment or overcomeness that can turn us away from an ability to focus on God or to focus on our commitment to Judaism. I think Kohelet is saying flip it exactly the opposite way. Instead of it being what's the point in anything, recognize that there is the point in the most important, most sacred, most valuable things. And those are my relationships to my family, the people who love me, and that's my relationship to God and Torah. And everything else, whether it's I filled up the whole sticker chart and I want to know what's next, or I realize now I'm never going to fill up the sticker chart, either of those things is not the thing to focus on and shouldn't be the thing that saps my emotional and mental energy in a way that takes me away from being able to focus on God and Torah. If instead I say that's all, either it's great or it's not great, maybe it's frustrating and hard, maybe it's just what I have to slog through until I retire, or maybe it's fulfilling and rewarding, but then what? Either way, that's not where the focus is, that's not where the emphasis is. Allows us to reorient in a different way and think differently about our religious lives. I hit the point, so aside from taking up hiking, the other thing I did as a midlife crisis is I hit the point where I said, despite being an administrator in an Orthodox high school and a speaker and a this and a that, I don't learn enough Torah. I don't speak about Torah, as you could tell. We make believe I speak about Torah. So he said to me, oh, sources. And I was like, oh, sources, kind of, not really. We'll pretend. Shh, don't tell anyone. Ayana here is very big on the sources. My skill set is like, I'm a vacuum cleaner. I collect all kinds of random interesting things. And people are like, oh, huh, that's interesting. And sometimes I end up talking about them in the shul, the person who wrote them. And that's cool too. But I said, like, I don't learn enough Torah. So I signed up for a 4-year, we just started the second year, a 4-year intensive women's halacha learning program. There are times I'm like, what, when I'm sitting with my chavrusa on Zoom at 5:15 in the morning, like a little bit like, what on earth did I sign myself up for? But year 1 down, year 2 started, I missed shears from 7:15 to 10:15 a.m. on Sunday. I missed it today because I was on the plane with recorded, so I'll get to listen to it. You can say at 45 or 55 or 65 or 75, the thing that's important, I haven't done enough of, and I'm going to reorient towards doing more of it. Maybe when I was young, I found it inspirational to hear about these like whiz kid geniuses who knew all of Torah by heart when they were 3. Now I find it inspirational to hear about people who embarked on serious learning programs at 45 or 55 or 65 or 75. Because they said, I've decided now that it's important, and I've decided now that I didn't do enough of it, and why not? The fact you haven't done it until now doesn't mean you can't start now. And I'm inspired by women I know who are my peers who've done the same thing. They hit a certain point in life, maybe their kids are no longer as young, and they said that it's time to recognize that there's a second mountain. And what does that second mountain look like for me? And finally, I want to talk about two things that are much harder. If this is in the direction of ascending difficulty, right? Just the routine and the boredom of it is actually the easiest thing to deal with. And the is there all there is, I feel like I've either accomplished in life or I haven't accomplished what I wanted to in life. And either way, it's a taking stock moment. That's the next step. But the hardest things to reckon with are when the breakdown in my relationship with God or Judaism is not just because I got busy with carpool. It's not just because of demands of earning a living. It is because I have problems with God, or I have problems with Torah, or I have problems with the Jewish community. And I don't know that I can be in that relationship I once was in, not just because I got tired or it got routinized or I'm distracted, but actually because there's been a break in this relationship. I don't know, I think it's time for couples therapy for me and God. And I'm doing so hot. And so I want to talk about that for a minute, which I actually mean a little bit more than a minute. And then disillusionment with Jews and Jewish leaders. And then it is not original or creative to say that there is evil in the world and it does not seem to be apportioned by any logic of fairness or justice. We all know that. It's one of the oldest philosophical questions that there is. We know really not good people who are doing fine, and we know great people who are suffering. And sometimes it's not about great people. Sometimes it's about us. I'm not a great person. I'm just a person. Really, God? Why me? Why me? All my friends seem to, all my neighbors seem to, whatever the seem to is about. It's about parnas and the ability to make a living. It's about health and the lump that I found. It's about children and the ways in which they're turning out the ways that I'd hoped or not hoped. It's my own life and the ways it's turning out the ways that I hoped. Why me, God? Really? It just doesn't seem fair. Isn't fair. There is a world of philosophical answers to this question, none of which I'm going to be able to engage. Well, one of which I'm going to engage this morning. Most of which I'm not going to be able to engage this morning. You've all heard them. Guess what? They're all great. 99 point, I don't know what % of people, when we are in the moment, when we are in extremis, that whole load of answers does not help us. I get it, this world, the world to come, the tapestry, the front, the back. You see the front, you understand what all the threads are doing. You see the back, you see a mess of knots, right? You've heard that one? All those things, that's all great. Why is my child struggling with X and all the neighbors' kids are fine? Why is my life so challenging in this way? And all around me, I see people who seem to. For a few years in SAR, I taught Machshav Israel. I taught our Jewish philosophy class. This is one of the topics we deal with. How to teach Jewish philosophy and not deal with this. And I taught all the things we teach, and I gave all the answers we give. And then one year, while we were in the middle of this unit, a horrific tragedy struck the community of which I was a part. Children are left orphans without parents. And I went into my principal and I said, I can't go in and teach. I don't know what to say. I'm going to go in and start with I got nothing. So I went into the kids and I said, I got nothing. The only thing that speaks to me in that moment is the end of Sefer Eov, the end of the book of Job. Job is a man who goes through horrendous suffering, visited upon him by God as some kind of test of his steadfastness and loyalty to God. And then all of Eov's friends show up to try to give him explanations and answers. And Eov's like, all your answers are worthless. They don't answer anything. They do not account for the pain I'm going through. And finally, God shows up. God shows up in the whirlwind famously and says, And God doesn't say, here's my reason, and here's how I did it, and here's why I did it. God says, where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Speak if you have understandings. Do you know who fixed its dimensions or measured it with a line? And then the next parak. Do you know the season when the mountain goats give birth? Can you mark the time when the hens calve? Can you count the months they may complete? Do you know the season they give birth? When they crouch to bring forth their offspring to deliver their young? God's response to Eov is not, here's why it's fair, here's why it makes sense. God's response to Eov is, you don't know how I run the world. The world is bigger and vaster and more complicated and has more moving parts. And for me, this is a personal statement, some people here might say, I actually find some of those answers and explanations satisfying. I actually do think that hearing that it's because I'm treasuring up sachar, reward for the world to come, I do find that comforting. For me, in that moment, the only thing that works is I don't know how God runs the world. And honestly, God, right now, it seems like you're doing a fairly lousy job of it. But I don't know how God runs the world. So only because, as Zoe mentioned, I'm fairly active on Twitter. I came across this one day in 2019 and shared it with all the other teachers who were teaching Machshav Yisrael because I thought it was hysterical, because it's like 3 prakim of Eov summarized in a tweet. Job, hey God, you killed like literally all of my kids. What's up with that? God, how dare you speak that way to the inventor of the hippopotamus? So it's not exactly what the parak is saying. I just thought that was funny. But the parak is kind of saying, you don't know how I run the world. When I figure out the mountain goats give birth, their babies don't roll off the mountain and everything else in nature that somehow works out, you do not know how I run the world. That's not an answer. That is a recognition that we don't have answers. I want to be very clear. There might be a time in my youth when I thought there would be answers. I would study enough philosophy. I would have enough things that in that moment I would feel like there are answers. And now I'm middle age, you know what I feel like? All of those answers at a certain point, sorry to say this, but in extremis in the moment feel insulting. Tapestries and knots, like it's not working in that moment of intense suffering. And the only thing that works for me in that moment is to say, it feels unanswerable because it's unanswerable. Because I don't know how God runs God's world. And maybe it's possible to say, again, I really don't know how you're running your world. Right now, it seems to me like you're doing a fairly lousy job of it. But if I can acknowledge that and I can say that, not that I have to come to some peace with this or some reconciliation with this or some acknowledgement of I can say this makes no sense to me. It's okay for it to make no sense to me. It doesn't have to make sense to me. I don't have to come to some point where I say that it makes sense to me. I'm allowed to say it makes no sense to me. It is incomprehensible to me. I don't know how God is running God's world, nor am I supposed to know how God is running God's world. So we'll leave it at that. And finally, and this might actually be the hardest. It might even be harder than thinking that God is doing a bad job at being God. Many of us, in one way or another, at one point or another, feel like the Jewish community as a collective, in its leadership, in its authority figures, in its institutions, has let us down, has failed us, individually, collectively. I'm not going to bother with examples. There are more of them than I could come up with. Every one of us can think of examples that we are closer to or farther away from, whether it's an individual person or an institution or the leadership. When you feel like, what even is this? What is this institution, organization, structure, community that I'm supposed to be a part of? And I think it is very real. Not I think, I know, because we all know, and because some of these people come and talk to me. I think it is very real that there are people who withdraw because of the failings they see and they experience. And there are other people, I want to name something which I find actually to be particularly true about women. They're like, okay, I'm not withdrawing physically. I'm not leaving the community. I have an enormous amount invested in my life in this community. But I can no longer sign on for a community that's telling me, a leadership that's telling me, an institution that's telling me. So basically you can have my body, but you can't have my brain. You can't have my heart, you can't have my soul. I'm not leaving. I'm not really in either. I've had fascinating conversations. Again, these people find their way to me. I've had fascinating conversations with people deep in far right or wing communities than the one I currently occupy, women in particular, who are living that way. I'm not leaving. My investment in my life, in my family, in my community is too high. You have my body, I'm staying here. But you don't have my mind, you don't have my heart, you don't have my soul. And I want to say two seemingly contradictory things. The first thing is that I have experienced some of that pain. There are people who have experienced far more of that than I have. And I would never say to somebody who feels like it's just too much, it's too awful, it's too painful, it's too horrible, I can't keep showing up, it's time for me to leave and be someplace where I feel safer and more protected. I would never say to somebody who felt that way, you can't, you must not, how dare you, it's your job to stay in, it's your obligation to stay in, for whatever reason, whether it's your halachic obligation or don't you want to stay and fight and make the community a better place. In either way, I don't have the right to say that. To somebody who's feeling that and is suffering. And also, and here's the and also I want to say, Jewish community is not God in the Torah. Our institutions are not God in the Torah. The leadership is not God in the Torah. The rabbinate is not God in the Torah. And if you want to be here, if you want to be in, don't let the way human beings are acting or the decisions they're making or the things they're doing or saying or not doing or not saying be the thing that lets a rupture develop in your relationship with Hashem and Hashem's Torah. Again, I want to say very clearly that I'm saying two contradictory things here and I'm owning that. For people who feel like either my problems with the Torah itself and I can't, or my problems with halacha, or my problems with mechitza and I cannot stay in this community. So you can't stay in this community and I'm not here to say, well, you should suffer through. But for those of us, and I put myself very much in the second camp, who might have problems sometimes with people or institutions, but have actually found our way to being okay with Torah and halacha and the structure of Orthodox Judaism, like we're fine with that. We get to stay here and hold on to it and be into it and not allow what people are doing to drive us away from Hashem and Hashem's Torah. My adult relationship with Hashem and with Judaism can be to say that I recognize that the structures of Judaism and even the structures of Orthodoxy might be important and valuable and contribute in really big and meaningful ways to the community, and they are not God and they are not God's Torah. My relationship is with God and with God's Torah. So here, just to wrap things up, I was speaking in the shul in Berkeley, California, and I had a quote like this from Daniel Boyarin on my source sheet. And I actually knew that Daniel Boyarin was in the shul in Berkeley, but I didn't know Daniel Boyarin had actually left the shul in Berkeley over some kind of political dispute. So that was a different kind of thing where like I quoted him in the shul. It was like a whole excitement. He wrote very powerfully in his introduction to Unheroic Conduct about his love for Orthodox Judaism and also the complexity of that love, the ways in which he sees Orthodox institutions acting in ways that don't seem to him to be ideal. And he talks about his need to, he uses the term justify my love. And he says he means that both ways. Justify my love, like to explain to people why I love Orthodox Judaism, even in all of the ways that it seems problematic, challenging, difficult, flawed. And also he says to justify my love, to make my love more just. If I'm going to love a community that I think has problems, I'm going to work to make it more just. So again, for those people, and might be self-selecting, for those people who are in that much pain and feel that hurt by the community and institutions, they may not be here and they may not hear this. But for people for whom the outcome is that they say, I can't be in this community or these institutions, it is not my place ever to say to people, you must subject yourself to pain or suffering to stay in the community that you feel like is too harmful place for you to stay. But for those of us for whom the community is where we want to be, the Orthodox, the observant Jewish community is where we want to be. and where sometimes it's people with whom we're having a hard time, we can choose to say, my relationship was with Hashem, with Hashem's Torah, and the people and the institutions that are problematic don't get to define what my relationship is. And maybe too, I have to find ways to justify my love. So as we headed into last night, early this morning, depending when you did it, for Ashkenazim anyway, my Sephardi students have been saying Slichot for a while. But as Ashkenazim, we headed into Slichot season last night. We're heading into Rosh Hashanah a week from tomorrow, a week from tonight. And when we often frame it very specifically as tshuva and repentance, penitence for sins, it really is a chance to think about what our relationship with God looks like. Where are we with God? Where are we in this relationship? And if it's a relationship that at one point for us was a relationship that was marked by an enormous burst of excitement and passion, and maybe in one way or another that's waned, that's ebbed. It's ebbed because it's become routinized. It's ebbed because we felt blah in our own lives and it's been hard to invest in. It's ebbed because we've been angry at or distant from God. It's ebbed because we've been angry at or distant from the institutions and the leadership of the community. In any of those ways, I want to invite us to think about what it might look like to re-engage in that relationship. Not to go back to the love of the bridal days. You don't recreate being 22. But to reimagine and to reconceive of what it might look like to form a relationship with Hashem, with Hashem's Torah, and with our Judaism as an adult relationship, sustainable through all the decades of our lives. Thank you.